Warren Buffett has been compounding money for over 6 decades, 93 years old, $137 billion, and the habits that built it are almost embarrassingly ordinary. That's the part that doesn't get talked about. We've all absorbed the same story. The genius, the insight, the one brilliant call that changed everything. But when you actually study how he operates day to day, the picture looks nothing like that. In this video, we'll walk you through 3 specific filters Buffett uses to make decisions, not philosophies, actual operating habits, and the mechanisms behind why they work. Now, you're probably thinking you already have a general sense of this. Be patient, think long-term, don't panic sell. And yeah, that's not wrong. But here's where it gets strange. A guy in Ohio, mid-30s, solid income, putting money away every month, doing everything right on paper, watches his portfolio barely move while people around him seem to be winning on every side. He starts reading more financial news, making small adjustments, and staying active. And that activity, that reasonable, well-intentioned response to uncertainty, is exactly what cost him. Here's the reframe. Buffett's edge isn't what he does, it's what he refuses to do. Now, the habits that protect his money are mostly invisible, and that's precisely why they work. My name is Alex, and if you've ever watched your account grow slower than it should, while your spending felt completely reasonable, stick around, because the gap between what Buffett actually does and what we think he does is where most people quietly lose. And I'm going to show you exactly what fills that gap. It starts with something he calls the termite problem, not the big disasters, the small, like daily ones you never see coming. Most people worry about the wrong thing. When someone asks what destroys a financial life, the answer that comes to mind is usually dramatic: a market crash, a bad investment, a layoff at the wrong time. And look, those things are real. They happen, but they're also visible. You see them coming, or at least you see them after they hit. You can respond. The thing that actually hollows out most people's finances never announces itself. Think about a house with a termite problem. From the outside, looks completely fine. The paint is fresh, the lawn is cut, but inside the walls, something has been eating away at the structure for years. By the time you notice, the damage is already done. Buffett uses almost exactly this image when he talks about how wealth gets destroyed. Not hurricanes, termites. Here's what that looks like in practice. The average American household earning around $94,000 a year, which is close to the US median household income heading into 2026, spends roughly 33% of their take-home pay on things that felt like reasonable decisions in the moment. The upgraded phone plan, the subscription that auto-renewed, the slightly nicer car because the old one was paid off, and the monthly payment felt manageable. None of those decisions felt reckless, and each one made sense on its own. But stack 12 of them together across a year, and you're looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 that left quietly, without a single dramatic moment to point to. That's the termite effect. Small, consistent, invisible until it isn't. Now here's the part worth sitting with. The same mechanism runs in both directions. The exact force that quietly drains a financial foundation can also quietly build one. Buffett didn't get to $137 billion through a handful of enormous wins. He got there through decades of small, disciplined, compounding decisions that most people would have found unbearably boring. He's been investing since he was 11 years old. By the time he was 30, he had already accumulated the equivalent of several $1,000,000 in today's money, not through one defining moment, but through the relentless repetition of a few simple habits applied over time. That's not a motivational point. That's a mechanical one. Compounding doesn't care whether the habit is positive or negative. It just multiplies whatever you feed it. Feed it small leaks, and it quietly drains you. Feed it small disciplines, and it quietly builds something most people can't explain when they look at your results from the outside. So the question isn't whether small habits matter. They clearly do. The real question is whether you're paying attention to the right ones. And this is where most financial advice completely misses the point. It focuses on the big moves. Max out your retirement account, rebalance your portfolio, negotiate your salary. All of that matters, but it sits on top of a foundation that's either solid or quietly compromised. And the foundation is made of the tiny stuff, the daily defaults, the automatic decisions you stopped examining years ago. And one more thing worth saying here, because it's the piece that tends to sting a little. The termites aren't always spending. Sometimes they're behavioral. The habit of checking your portfolio when the market drops and feeling the urge to do something. The habit of absorbing financial news every morning and letting it shape your mood before you've made a single decision. The habit of measuring your financial position against a neighbor, a colleague, a social media feed. Those habits compound too. They compound into anxiety, into reactive decisions, into a constant low-grade feeling that you're behind, even when the numbers say you're not. Buffett built a system specifically designed to address all of this. Not a set of rules, a set of filters. And the first one is the one that almost nobody applies, because it requires something most of us were never taught to treat as a financial asset. It requires knowing what you don't know, and having the discipline to act on that honestly. Here's something that sounds almost too simple to be useful. The single most protective financial habit Buffett has isn't a buying strategy. It isn't a valuation method. It's a filing system. Specifically, it's a physical pile on his desk labeled "too hard," and the amount of money that pile has saved him is probably incalculable. Most of us were raised with a very specific idea about intelligence, that smart people figure things out, that if something is complicated, the right response is to study harder, dig deeper, and work until you understand it. And in most areas of life, that instinct serves you well. In investing, it can quietly destroy you. Here's why. The market does not give you extra credit for difficulty. There is no bonus return for taking on a complex idea that took you 3 months to understand. The return is the same whether the opportunity was obvious to you in 5 minutes or required a graduate-level analysis to decode. So complexity isn't a feature, it's a cost. It costs you time, it costs you clarity, and most importantly, it costs you the ability to know when you're wrong. Buffett figured this out early. When a new investment idea crosses his desk, he gives it roughly 3 minutes. If he can't answer 3 basic questions, how does this business make money? Who is trying to take that money away from it? And what does it look like in 10 years? He doesn't spend another second on it. It goes in the pile. Not because it's a bad idea, because it's outside his circle. He calls it the Circle of Competence. And the insight at the center of it is one of the most underrated ideas in personal finance. It's not about how big your circle is. It's about knowing exactly where the edge is. Think about what that actually means. Most people have a reasonably good understanding of a few industries. Maybe it's the field they work in. Maybe it's a sector they've followed for years. Inside that circle, they can evaluate quality, spot problems early, and make judgments that an outsider simply can't. Outside that circle, they're essentially guessing, but with enough surface familiarity to feel confident. That gap between feeling informed and actually being informed is where most investment mistakes live. Watch how this plays out in practice. Consider someone in their late 30s working in healthcare administration in the Midwest with a decent salary, who has been putting money into a brokerage account for about 6 years. In early 2024, he starts reading about semiconductor stocks. The AI narrative is everywhere. The numbers look compelling. He doesn't work in tech, doesn't have a background in it, but he's read enough articles to feel like he has a handle on the space. He moves about $18,000 into a concentrated position across 3 names. 14 months later, he's sitting on a 31% loss, not because the thesis was obviously wrong, but because he didn't have the depth to know what he didn't know. He couldn't read the signals that an insider would have caught early. He was operating just outside his circle, which is the most dangerous place to be, because it feels almost identical to being inside it. This is the part Buffett is ruthless about. He famously passed on most technology companies during the 90s boom, including ones that went on to generate enormous returns, and he didn't apologize for it. His reasoning was straightforward. He didn't understand the business well enough to know what a fair price was, so he had no business buying it. While others were treating that admission as a weakness, he was protecting his capital from a category of risk that has no floor. The humility required to say, "I don't get this, so I'm going to pass," is genuinely hard. It goes against every instinct that got most people to a stable professional life. But here's the reframe. Saying no to things outside your circle isn't a limitation. It's the filter that keeps everything else clean. Your circle doesn't need to be wide. It needs to be honest. And once you've built that filter, the next problem becomes just as dangerous. Because even inside your circle, the amount of noise trying to pull you off course is relentless. Here's a number that should make you pause. The average American adult now consumes somewhere around 10 to 12 hours of media per day. News, social feeds, podcasts, and financial commentary. 10 to 12 hours. And somewhere inside all of that, There are maybe 20 minutes of information that will actually matter to your financial life 5 years from now. The rest is noise dressed up as a signal. Buffett identified this problem decades before the information environment got this bad, and the filter he built around it is probably the least glamorous habit on this list, and also the most consequential. There are really only two categories of information. Most of what we consume falls into the first category: temporary information, earnings surprises, rate decision reactions, geopolitical headlines, whatever a financial commentator said on television this morning. This kind of information has a half-life of maybe 24 to 48 hours. It's designed to feel urgent. It creates anxiety. And that anxiety is not an accident. Here's the mechanism worth understanding. Every time you react to temporary information, check your portfolio, make an adjustment, move something around, there is someone on the other side of that transaction who benefits. Brokerage platforms make money on activity. Financial media makes money on attention. Advisors in certain fee structures make money on movement. And the entire architecture of the modern financial information system is quietly optimized to keep you engaged, slightly unsettled, and feeling like you need to do something. That's not a conspiracy. That's just where the incentives point. Buffett operates almost entirely in the second category: permanent knowledge, business history, human psychology, how industries rise and collapse across decades, biographies of people who built and lost fortunes. And this kind of information has a half-life of centuries. It doesn't tell you what to do tomorrow. It builds a mental library of patterns that lets you recognize what's actually happening when everyone else is reacting to the surface. His reading habit is well documented. Around 500 pages a day, maintained for decades. Not skimming headlines. Deep reading, the kind that forces your brain to build connections rather than just absorb facts. He once described it as compounding knowledge the same way money compounds. Slow, invisible, and then suddenly undeniable. Now, you might be thinking that 500 pages a day is not a realistic habit for someone with a full-time job and a family. Fair point. But that's not the actual lesson. The lesson is about the ratio. How much of your daily information intake is temporary versus permanent? For most people, that ratio is badly skewed. 90% temporary, 10% permanent, if that. Flipping even a fraction of that changes the quality of your thinking over time in ways that are hard to measure but very easy to feel. The second half of this filter is about something called action bias. This one is subtle. Action bias is the instinct to do something when you feel uncertain or anxious. It's deeply human. Sitting still when the market drops 3% in a day feels irresponsible. Reading that a sector you're invested in is facing headwinds and not reacting feels almost negligent. But study after study on retail investor behavior shows that the portfolios that get touched the least tend to outperform the ones that get actively managed by their owners. In one widely cited pattern tracked across U.S. brokerage accounts, the accounts with the highest trading frequency underperformed the lowest frequency accounts by roughly 1.5 to 2 percentage points annually. And compounded over 20 years, that gap is not a rounding error. That's a retirement. Buffett's image for this is a crocodile. It doesn't chase every fish. It sits completely still, conserving energy, waiting for the one moment where the odds are overwhelmingly in its favor. Then it moves. That stillness isn't passivity. It's discipline with a very specific purpose. The practical version of this filter is straightforward, even if it isn't easy. Consume less temporary information. Read more things with a long shelf life. And when you feel the urge to act on something you just read, wait 48 hours. Not because the information is wrong, because the anxiety it created is temporary, and decisions made from temporary anxiety tend to have permanent consequences. Which brings us to the third filter. And this one is the most personal because it's not about information at all. It's about who you're trying to impress. Nobody thinks they're keeping up with the Joneses. That's the tricky part. Ask anyone if they make financial decisions based on what other people think, and almost everyone will say no. They'll say their choices are practical, reasonable, based on their own priorities, and they'll mean it. But the data tells a different story. The 2025 survey of U.S. households earning between $75,000 and $150,000 annually found that nearly 68% increased their discretionary spending within 6 months of receiving a raise or bonus, not by saving more first, by spending more. A new car, a kitchen renovation, a vacation that was slightly beyond what they'd normally consider. Each decision individually defensible. Collectively, A pattern with a name: lifestyle creep. It's the most socially acceptable wealth trap in existence. And it's dangerous precisely because it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like progress. You earned more, so you're living better. That's how it's supposed to work, right? But here's what's actually happening underneath the surface. Every time you permanently upgrade your cost of living, you raise the floor. The new baseline requires more income just to maintain. And the gap between what you earn and what you keep, which is the only number that actually compounds, quietly shrinks or disappears entirely. Buffett has lived in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska since 1958. He paid $31,500 for it. Today it's worth an estimated $1.4 million. He still lives there. He drives himself to work. He eats at McDonald's most mornings. These aren't PR stunts. They're the visible surface of something much more structural, a deliberate decision to keep his cost of living disconnected from his net worth. Now, most people hear this and think it's about frugality, being cheap, denying yourself things. But that framing completely misses the point. Buffett isn't living below his means because he can't afford better. He's living the way he lives because he made a decision about which scorecard he's playing by. Here's the distinction. There are two scorecards available to everyone. The outer scorecard measures your worth by what other people think of you. The car in the driveway, the neighborhood, the title on the business card. The outer scorecard is exhausting to maintain because it has no fixed finish line. Someone always has a newer car, a bigger house, a better title. You can spend an entire career chasing a standard that keeps moving, funded by income that could have been compounding quietly in the background. And the inner scorecard is different. It measures your decisions against your own standards, regardless of whether anyone else notices or approves. It's not about deprivation. It's about clarity. When you know why you're making a decision, really know, not just rationalize. The social pressure loses most of its grip. Watch how this plays out at ground level. Consider a software engineer in his early 40s, based in Austin, with a household income just over $160,000. Gets a promotion, $22,000 raise. Within 8 months, he's leased a new vehicle, moved to a larger apartment, and started eating out roughly 4 nights a week instead of 2. Each decision felt earned. But that $22,000 raise effectively disappeared into the new baseline. His savings rate barely moved. His net worth 1 year later was almost identical to what it was the day before the promotion, and the raise came and went and left almost no trace, because his lifestyle absorbed it faster than he noticed. That's the outer scorecard at work: invisible, automatic, and expensive. Buffett's McDonald's habit is a small but telling example of the inner scorecard in practice. He adjusts his order based on how he feels about market conditions that morning, not because the dollar difference matters to him financially, but because the ritual keeps him anchored to the idea that every dollar has weight. It's a daily psychological reset, a small act of not letting comfort become automatic. You don't need to eat at McDonald's every morning, but the underlying habit, regularly examining your defaults, questioning what's become automatic, checking whether your spending reflects your actual values or just your social environment. That habit is worth more than most investment strategies, because the fastest way to undermine all three filters is to build your life around a cost structure that demands you keep earning more just to stay in place. That pressure is what makes the final piece of this so important. There's a version of this story that ends with a dramatic insight, a single realization that changes everything, a moment of clarity that reorganizes how you see money forever. That's the version people want. It's clean, it's satisfying, it fits the way we're used to consuming information. But here's the uncomfortable truth about everything covered in this video. None of it is dramatic, and that's exactly the point. Buffett's entire system, the too hard pile, the 500 pages a day, the $31,000 house he still lives in, none of it looks impressive in the moment. None of it would make a good movie scene. It's just a set of quiet, consistent, slightly boring decisions repeated across decades. And the reason most people never build anything close to what he's built isn't that they lack intelligence or opportunity, it's that they're waiting for something more interesting to come along. This is worth sitting with for a moment. We are living in the most stimulus-rich financial environment in history. In 2026, the average retail investor has access to real-time data, zero commission trades, fractional shares, option strategies, cryptocurrency, leveraged ETFs, and an endless stream of commentary telling them that the next big opportunity is right around the corner. All of that access feels like an advantage, and in the right hands, some of it is. But for most people, it's a complex machine that creates the illusion of edge while quietly generating fees, taxes, and behavioral mistakes that compound in the wrong direction. The research on this is fairly consistent. Over any given 15-year period, somewhere between 85 and 90% of actively managed funds underperformed their benchmark index. Not because the managers are incompetent, because the costs and the activity compound against you. The boring option, a low-cost index fund, held without interruption, reinvested automatically, beats the exciting option most of the time. Not occasionally, most of the time. Buffett has said versions of this for decades. The investor who does nothing during a market panic preserves more value than the one who acts decisively on incomplete information. The business that focuses on its fundamentals for 20 years builds more durable value than the one that chases every emerging trend. Non-consistency isn't a consolation prize for people who can't find something better. It's the strategy. Here's a concrete way to feel that. Two people start investing at 30. The first puts away $1,400 a month into a broad index fund and never touches it. The second puts away the same amount but makes 4 portfolio changes a year. Nothing dramatic, just reasonable adjustments based on market conditions and financial news. Assume a 7% average annual return for the first and a 5.5% effective return for the second after taxes, fees, and the behavioral drag of mistimed moves. By age 65, the first person has approximately $1.8 million. The second has approximately $1.1 million. Same income, same starting point, same monthly contribution. The difference is roughly $700,000, and it came almost entirely from doing less. That's not a trivial gap. $700,000 is about 9 years of median U.S. household income. It's the difference between retiring at 65 and retiring at 65 with options. So what does boring actually look like as a practice? It looks like a spending baseline you review once a year instead of rationalizing in real time. It looks like a portfolio you check quarterly instead of daily. It looks like passing on the investment you don't fully understand, even when everyone around you seems to be getting rich from it. It looks like a raise that goes into savings before it touches your lifestyle. None of those actions feels powerful when you do them. They feel almost anticlimactic. But that's the signature of a good financial habit. It should feel a little boring. If it feels exciting, that's usually the risk of talking. Buffett once described his approach as trying to be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. But the less quoted part of that idea is what makes it work. To do that consistently, you need a system that insulates your decisions from your emotions, your ego, and the noise of whatever everyone else is doing. The 3 filters are that system. Know what you don't know. Consume what compounds. Live below your social pressure. That's the whole mechanism. And it has been, quietly, all along. Here's what this all comes down to. Buffett's results look extraordinary from the outside, but the system that produced them is almost aggressively ordinary. 3 filters. Applied consistently for a very long time. That's the whole thing. Wealth doesn't get built in the moments you remember. It gets built in the moments you barely notice. The decision you didn't make, the upgrade you passed on, the headline you ignored, the boring fund you left alone for another year. The termites work in both directions, always. The only question is which kind you're breeding. So here's what's worth watching in your own life. Notice where complexity is creeping into your financial decisions. Notice what information is making you anxious versus what's actually making you wiser. Notice whether your last 3 financial upgrades were driven by genuine need or quiet social pressure. You don't need to overhaul everything. You need to see it clearly first. There's a related question this naturally leads to. If consistency beats intensity over time, why do so many disciplined people still feel financially stuck in their 40s? The gap between doing the right things and actually getting ahead, that's worth examining closely. If this reframed something for you, share it with someone. It might help.